Hello and welcome everyone, Slothcakes here, and like usual, today we're going to be looking at a mobile suit. But we're going to be taking a little bit of a detour of our usual analysis of the amphibious variety, and instead we're going to be looking at one of the most recognizable mobile suits of all of Gundam, and just all in the mecha genre in general. And that is the Gundam, the first, the OG, the White Devil, the RX-78-2 Gundam. But specifically, we're going to be looking at his arsenal because as a whole, he had some weird weapons in the original run. So let's go through everything and talk about what they are, their specs, their history, and just in general talk about them as a whole, in both a meta and in an in-universe way since, why not, that sounds like fun. But first, some ground rules. We're going to be specifically looking at the RX-78-2, so while I will mention a few of them, I'm not going to be going over the -1 nor the -3 through 7. And we're going to be primarily sticking to Amuro Ray's RX-78, since we do have a handful of variants and a decent amount of full armors, and if we covered all their weapons in one video, it'd be a mess. But with all that out the way, let's start things off with his most iconic weapon, the beam rifle. The BOWA XBRM-7907G beam rifle, or beam rifle for short. This thing was a technological marvel. Being the first to be deployed in battle, the Gundam beam rifle was a massive feat for the Federation. They were able to harness the power of a beam weapon, which was found on things like warships at the time, and made it so a mobile suit could deploy with it. This monster of a tool was easily able to one-shot a mobile suit, and Amuro was even able to one-shot an entire warship. Design-wise, it looks like a rifle. The only thing that sticks out is that very goofy scope, which I love so much. The Gundam can fire this one-handed, or he could use the foregrip in the front and fire this two-handed for additional support. And paired with his fire control system, which is linked with his movable offset sensor, which is that massive circular yellow thing you see on the beam rifle. And if we add to the fact that beam shots don't lose speed, nor do they drop off, the beam rifle has a very high degree of accuracy for a weapon that's classified as mid-range. Now for some negatives, because everything has some bad sides to it, the beam rifle is an expensive weapon and a rare one. Because of this, it's hard to maintain and repair. Thankfully, Amuro never ran into this problem, but if his beam rifle were to break for whatever reason, finding replacement parts to repair this thing would be a hassle. Next up is the ammo, with only having 12 to 15 shots as a whole. And that's not per clip or anything. The beam rifle cannot be reloaded manually. You have to plug it back into white base, which then it could recharge. And if you already exhausted it and you get into another battle, well, you're gonna have to deploy in the beam rifle with not a full clip. And while 12 to 15 shots seems alright, in Amuro's case, a majority of the battles, he was either the main fighting force or the only fighting force for white base, so he was always outnumbered, so those 12 to 15 shots had to count. But thankfully Amuro had other weapons to rely on, like the Hyper Bazooka. Now the Hyper Bazooka is a recoilless rocket launcher that fires 380mm rockets. These bad boys are designed for heavily armored fortifications like warships. However, these rockets do wonders to things like buildings, terrains, or mobile suits, with one rocket being easily able to take out a mobile suit with a direct hit, and the splash damage from a single rocket is said to be able to destroy or badly damage multiple mobile suits at the same time. Now, as bazookas go, even in this futuristic setting, they're still pretty simple. Big tubey thing shoots big rocket that makes big boom boom. But for more information, the Hyper Bazooka has a slow rate of fire and the rockets don't travel as fast as bullets nor beam shots, which is gonna make it hard to land direct hits. And while you can rely on splash damage on land or where you're near surfaces, if you're shooting in the air or just in open space, it's gonna be much tougher to hit someone. Now the Hyper Bazooka holds 5 shots per mag and reloads from the back. The bazooka is held one-handed and the back rests on the shoulder. This gives you a free hand to do something like hold a shield. Thankfully, the Gundam's advanced learning computer helped Amuro early on get used to the Hyper Bazooka shot and help him line up said shots. Plus with his thick lunitanium armor, it kept Amuro safe while he lined up said shots. Now something that the Gundam has done that's more shown on things like the G3 is deploying with 2 Hyper Bazookas, one on each shoulder. And the advantage of 2 hyper bazookas is pretty simple. You can fire 2 rockets at the same time, which is definitely going to destroy whatever you're trying to hit, and you now have double the shots. The only problem I can see is that reloading both of them seems like a real pain in the ass. I doubt you can reload them while moving or on the fly. You'll probably have to stop and reload them individually. So be 1 or 2, the Hyper Bazooka is an effective weapon that served Amuro and the Federation well, and I do find it strange how Amuro never picked up a machine gun at any point. I just feel in some situations maybe a machine gun would have been a better, more realistic choice for him than a damn rocket launcher, but let Amuro be Amuro. Now from his main weapons to melee weapons, let's talk about the beam saber. Now the saber when undeployed just looks like a small handle, but when it's deployed it produces an eye field that suspends Minovsky particles in the shape of a rod, giving you the iconic beam saber look. So let's not sugarcoat it, the beam saber is effective. It is a very dangerous weapon that can cut through mostly anything with the slightest of ease, making it one terrifying weapon to go against. Overall, an amazing invention from the Federation that became a staple for them and just for mobile suits in general. Now, the Gundam is no different, and because of his thick lunar titanium armor, the Gundam can go into melee more effectively compared to a GM, and let me say, Amuro really took advantage of this, considering his main weapons didn't really have that much ammo. Now the Gundam does have 2 beam sabers compared to the GMs, which are also located on his backpack. Now the beam saber is not going to cut through everything. Heavily thick armor is going to take some time for the beam saber to cut through it, and also eye fields will stop beam sabers. Not only that, a beam saber can be clashed with another beam saber or a superheated weapon found on Zeon like the Heat Hawk. Anyways, like I said in the start, this beam saber is located in the backpack, each above the shoulder diagonal, and can be deployed with the sided hand. Now within each beam saber is an E-cap, which is kind of like a Minovsky battery which powers the beam saber. Now it's shown with extensive use that the beam sabers can actually deplete, and we don't have an exact time, and it probably has a lot of factors into it, like usage and how it's being used. And thankfully you can charge the beam sabers by just plugging them back into the backpack, and the Gundam has 2 of them, so if he's using one and it runs out of juice, just plug it back in and take out the other one, simple as that. And while we're on the topic of both beam sabers, Amuro and the Gundam have shown to be able to use both beam sabers at the same time, and it's just, now you have 2 melee weapons, so it's that simple. There's some ups and downsides, you can't use a shield, it's 2 beam sabers. Let's move on. So while beam sabers are found in many Federation mobile suits, the Gundam strived more with them since, well, it is classified as a close quarters mobile suit, and with the lunar titanium armor, he is very effective at melee. And at the start, with Amuro having no training in melee, he relied entirely on the learning computer, but slowly and surely, after many Zakus later, he got the hang of it and was even able to hold his own and defeat many Zeon Ace pilots at melee. Now we're going to be wrapping things up and heading to the Gundam's head to talk about his head Vulcans. These are standard armaments found in plenty of Federation mobile suits, and what they are Vulcan machine guns located in the head. Self-explanatory there. Now the Gundam's head Vulcans are located in the upper part of his head. He has one on each side and they fire standard 60mm shots. They have a high rate of fire and an overall low ammo count considering they're actually defensive weapons instead of offensive weapons. And also, you can only fit so much ammo in your head considering all the other shit that's up there. Now the main purpose for head Vulcans isn't for mobile suit to mobile suit combat. In a lot of cases, the head Vulcans won't actually penetrate mobile suit armor. However, the Gundam's head Vulcans was shown to be able to shred a Zaku at close range, but as armor got thicker and stronger, head Vulcans are not a reliable offensive tool. So what are head Vulcans for? Well, are missiles coming straight towards you? What about enemy infantry, enemy tanks, or enemy airplanes? Well, instead of using your main gun ammo, which in this case the Gundam's Hyper Bazooka or beam rifle, and wasting your very limited shots, just head Vulcan them. And it's as simple as that. Because of this, head Vulcans became a really reliable defensive tool and is seen in just a majority of future mobile suits. But because they're not made for mobile suit to mobile suit combat, that's why in some cases you just never see a mobile suit use their head Vulcans, because they're never in a situation where they need to use them. However, they're not completely ineffective against mobile suits. Like I said, Amura and the Gundam have shown to be able to shred a Zaku with these things. However, if you're aiming at weak spots on a mobile suit, such as the joints, the main camera, ammo, fuel storages, you can head Vulcan those and maybe get some good results. Next up on the list, we're going to be talking about this large rectangular thing known as the Gundam Shield. Visually, the Gundam Shield is a large, sort of rectangular shape that covers a little less than 50% of his body. This shield is standard armament in many Federation mobile suits, and the Gundam's no different. Now visually, the Gundam Shield has a gold cross on the bottom of it, while the other mobile suits usually don't. Now a really odd feature about this shield is on top we actually have a peephole that the Gundam can use to look through when he puts the shield in front of it. Now for some stats, the shield weighs 10 tons and it's made of a high density ceramic material based on a super hard steel alloy. Now there's more to it, like it being sandwiched against armored fibers and the outmost layer being made out of lunar titanium alloy. And this is accompanied by the insides having a triple honeycomb structure. Now what does this all mean? In simple terms, it means this shield can take a beating. Being able to handle both physical and beam attacks, this is an excellent defensive tool to any mobile suit. And while this shield has been destroyed plenty of times in the anime, it's done its job of protecting Amuro and the Gundam. And we can't forget that this shield has been used in an offensive manner. The Gundam is a close quarters combat mobile suit, and this shield's pretty good at close range combat. This thing can easily be used to shield bash or parry, and since the Gundam is a close quarters mobile suit, he's gonna rely that on a lot. And remember, the Zaku machine gun can't penetrate the Gundam's armor, so they have to go into melee, and with the Gundam in the shield, it's gonna be a tough time for them. And yes, if you want to, you can throw the shield at the enemy, and Amura has. Now everything we've covered so far, I like to call the gold standard of the RX-78. No matter where we look, either be the original anime, the trilogy, Gundam the Origin, or any other iteration of Amuro and the RX-78-2, he'll have these weapons. However, while the trilogy Gundam is considered the canon RX-78, and these are his weapons found, the OG anime and Gundam the Origin has depicted the Gundam with additional weapons, so let's go over them for, well, why the hell not? Now first up, and one of the most interesting, is the Super Napalm Launcher. The Super Napalm Launcher is an underbarrel attachment for the beam rifle. Visually, it's a 4-tube cylinder that launches powerful napalm rockets. And while information for this weapon is very scarce, and we'll get into that in a second, they first appeared and only appeared in episode 2 of the anime. Now in this episode, Amuro was tasked to destroy the leftover Gundam parts so Zeon couldn't get their hands on it. How he did this was he set the entire Super Napalm, then shot it with his beam rifle, detonating the entire thing. This caused the leftover parts to be rendered useless enough or destroyed to the point that Zeon couldn't scavenge them. Now what makes this weapon confusing is what I just described was the only time the Super Napalm was used in the anime. Amuro never attached the Super Napalm on the underbarrel of his beam rifle and shot it properly, so we don't know the damage or the effects that a single rocket can do. But we can do some speculation, and with what I just said, we have to look at the Super Napalm's ammo count, and sadly we don't know this. However, it is a 4-tube rocket launcher, so it either has 4 rounds in it or multiple of that. And with all those rounds being detonated at the same time, it was able to do that damage. So maybe one rocket is strong enough to not destroy, but damage a mobile suit. Upon direct impact, the Super Napalm might be able to do some damage to a mobile suit. However, after that, the Super Napalm takes effect. And for another thing we don't know if this is regular napalm or some advanced new formula of napalm that just burns brighter and hotter for insert reason here, but considering the name is Super Napalm, I'm gonna believe it's something like that. And while I don't think engulfing a mobile suit in flames is gonna do much to it considering how advanced these mobile suits are, and they can survive in the vacuum of space, However, maybe the damage of the rocket can expose something of the mobile suit that the napalm can take effect. Maybe that rocket can get through the outer layer armor, then the napalm burning can destroy something inside, melt something inside, or just do some shenanigans like that. Because hell, if the napalm gets close enough to the cockpit, while it might not damage the mobile suit, that heat might transfer and cook the cockpit alive. Which is a terrifying thing I just realized. But another thing we can think about is maybe the super napalm's not made for mobile suit combat. Simply put, a single shot from the super napalm might be great for setting large areas in the flames. Either be buildings, large areas, bases, fortifications, forests, infantry units, tanks, ground vehicles, the list goes on, but this might be simply great for crowd control. Now, an odd thing is, why did Amuro never get another super napalm launcher? You would think that if this weapon was useful or helpful, that White Base would either get their hands on another one for Amuro to take. We could speculate that maybe no one on White Base wanted to use napalm weapons because of how terrifying napalm is, and how horrified Amuro would be to launch this thing. And also could just be that flame-based weapons aren't that favored in mobile suits. In general, we don't see a lot of flame-based weapons. There's only a handful of mobile suits that just use any type of incendiary weapon. Now going back to melee, we're going to be covering an odd weapon, and that is the beam javelin. Now as a whole, the beam javelin is similar to the beam saber. It's a long handle when undeployed, but when deployed, instead of deploying an eye field that's in the shape of a saber, it deploys one in the shape of a ball with 3 prongs. The beam javelin's used how you expect a beam javelin to be used. It just gives Amuro and the Gundam longer reach, it allows them to use thrusting attacks more, and just keeps enemies at bay. And just to say it right here, yes, Amuro and the Gundam have thrown this weapon before. Now for some odd stuff. The odd thing about the beam javelin is how it came to be. You would think that Amuro would just be given the beam javelin, but no. Amuro was tinkering with the beam saber and removed the limiter. This allowed the beam saber handle to extend out and allowed it to create the eye field of the ball and 3 prongs. This is a very odd thing because why would this be behind the limiter? I would understand for like safety reasons or something, but it just seems really strange that you would have a feature like the handle extending out, then just hide it behind the limiter. Also, we don't get a clear answer of when the handle extends, is it supposed to make the beam javelin eye field, or did Amuro tinker with the eye field to make any shape he wants? And also, we see the beam javelin later on with the Federation, and it raises the question, did the Federation make the beam javelin, then Amuro did what he did, or did Amuro make it there, then the Federation adopted it? These are just questions that we don't have answers to. And as for the beam saber itself, because the eye field is smaller and much closer to the handle, does that mean the Minovsky particles are more concentrated, making the beam saber stronger in a way? And also, because the smaller eye field, does that mean the beam javelin just lasts longer than the beam saber or something like that? It's an odd weapon, however I love the concept. I like the idea that Amuro can grab this handle and either get a beam saber for a slashing weapon, or it extends out to the javelin and get a thrusting weapon that he can also throw. It's a pretty cool concept, and you know, he does have 2 of them, so throwing one is not that bad of an idea. But now let's talk about another melee. And this would be the Gundam Hammer, one of the most barbaric weapons in the Gundam's arsenal, being a literal handle, chain, and spike ball. That is it. It is that simple. This allows the gun to go medieval on Zeon's ass and apply blunt force trauma to a mobile suit's chest. But in all seriousness, that's what it is. He has to reel it back and give it a good swing if he wants to get as much damage in as possible. And there's obviously a lot of downsides to that. The fact that this is extremely telegraphed tells everyone what you're about to do. And even if you miss or hit something, you gotta reel it all the way back and do the same thing all over again. And if you cut the corners and try to do a quick throw, that's gonna have a lot less force than a full-on swing, so you're gonna do overall less damage. And in terms of power, to give you guys an example, this could destroy a Zaku in a single throw. Now, funny enough, Amuro has thrown the Gundam Hammer. And no, not like thrown the ball and chain, like I mean he's thrown the entire thing. Spike ball, chain, and handle. So while this is an odd weapon, the strangest thing about it is, it gets an upgrade. The Gundam Hammer becomes the Hyper Hammer, which is identical to the Gundam Hammer being the spike ball and chain. However, the spike ball now has thrusters on it. These thrusters are used to give the spike ball more momentum, allowing it to hit harder and hit faster. Now, not only that, when the Hyper Hammer is used, you can use the thrusters to retrieve the Hyper Hammer back to the Gundam much faster than the Gundam Hammer. Just be careful with that because, well, you're sending a giant spike ball with thrusters towards you, so make sure to catch it properly. And also, it's noted specifically that the Hyper Hammer has sharper spikes than the Gundam Hammer. So yeah. Now, you don't need to be a fan of Gundam or have seen the original series to know that this weapon's really out of place. The Hyper Hammer just seems like a really, and it sounds strange to say with a series of giant robots, unrealistic weapon. The act of swinging a giant spike ball with chain just seems really out of place in this series and how the story is trying to be portrayed. But with all that, this weapon became a fan favorite, with noteworthy appearances being in Turn A Gundam, where the Turn A uses 2 Hyper Hammers, Gundam Shield, where the Raider Gundam has a spike ball and chain, and in G Gundam, where the Bolt Gundam has a ball and chain weapon. But with all that wrapped up, we've now covered the original anime and the trilogy movies. But some may have noticed that I may have forgotten a certain flight unit. The reason? Well, the flight unit in question, I feel like it's less of a weapon of the Gundams and an overall machine of its own, so I do want to dedicate a video to him going more into specifics. However, we're still not done yet because we still have Gundam the Origin to cover. Because in Gundam the Origin, the RX-78-2, besides the weapons we already covered, has additional weapons that have not appeared in any other iteration of the Dash 2. Now, these weapons are pretty simple, so I'm just gonna blast straight through them, and this video is already long enough. Located in his left arm in the cuffs of the wrist, we have the Arm Vulcans. These are simply the head Vulcans, but in the arms, hence the name. They're used for the exact same reason the head Vulcans are used, it's just now the Gundam has it in his wrist as well. Now, oddly enough, we have another machine gun on the Gundam located in between the neck and the right shoulder, being a Gatling gun. While very similar to the head and wrist Vulcans, this Gatling gun is shown to be bigger, maybe shooting a bigger caliber bullet, meaning it's more damaging to mobile suits or just thicker armor in general. And the other side of the shoulder, we have the shoulder magnum, which is these 2 slots right here that look like they house a large caliber explosive or utility round. However, in the middle type, this shoulder magnum has been replaced with another Gatling gun. Finally, on the backpack of the Gundam, which houses his beam saber, he can take off the left one and replace it with a shoulder cannon. This is a medium range cannon that fires explosive shells. It reloads via clip on the back, and it does have a movable base so it can move on its own. And that's the main changes that the Origin Gundam has. Now, he does have a different looking beam rifle at first, however this beam rifle does get upgraded and looks like the traditional beam rifle we're used to. And we're finally at the end, and there you have it, the weapons of the RX-78-2. But there's still plenty of things I'm missing out, like the certain flying anomaly that shall not be mentioned, and plenty of other things like the Perfect Gundam and the various full armors. But like I said, if I covered all of them, we would be here all day. And if we look at specifically the gold standard weapons he has, you notice that he does not have a lot of internal weapons or just weapons in general. He has a main weapon, head Vulcans, and beam sabers. And this became a massive problem for Amuro, and that's why future units like the Dash 4 and 5 and the Alex added additional internal weapons like the wrist-mounted Gatling gun or the wrist-mounted beam spray guns. And in addition, this is why in Gundam the Origin, the Gundam has more additional weapons onto him, because simply, they're really helpful. But let's end it off here before I find something else to go on a weird tangent about. So like usual, Slothcakes here, hope you guys enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, blah blah blah, etc etc. Ending the video now, it's already long enough, see you next time.